Hi, my name is Minnah, and I'm a teen activist and a member of the Stop Sexual Assault in Schools Advisory Board. I'm here today talking with Emily Lindin, the author, producer, and founder of the UnSlut project. Thank you, Emily, so much for coming to talk with me, and I'm continuously inspired every time I hear your story, and I think you're really brave for sharing it.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thanks for having me.
So, for those of you who aren't so familiar with Emily's work, Emily, do you mind briefly sharing your story?
Sure. I started the UnSlut project a few years ago because I had heard too many news stories about girls who were being sexually bullied, in the worst cases because they had been the victims of sexual assault and weren't getting the support they needed, and so they were slut shamed instead of supported and took their own lives. So these news stories for the past few years have been really haunting me because I could relate to them, and that's because I was also labeled the school slut when I was in middle school, and I considered committing suicide at the time. I turned to self-harm. It was a really dark period for me from age 11 to about 14. So I decided about 3 years ago that I would use what I have, which is my diary from that time. I kept a really detailed diary, and I thought it would be a really valuable primary source to share with girls who were suffering so they would know that they weren't alone and that it could get better for them as well. So I put it up online on a platform called Wattpad, and it's still there. And just recently, I've added more context and commentary, and it's come out as a book called UnSlut, a Diary and a Memoir, which is really exciting. And the movement from just a few years ago when I started it has grown into much more than just my own story. It's inspired a lot of women, actually people of all genders, to submit their stories to the UnSlut project, which exists mostly online. And now it's a resource where people can find solidarity if they're going through sexual bullying, and where people who survived it can connect with other people and share their stories and know that it's not their fault and that things can get better for them too.
Thank you. Every time I hear your story, I learn more and I'm inspired more, but I feel like in some areas I can't fully relate to it because if I was in that situation, I would want to stand up for myself and tell the people who were wrongfully labeling me that what they were saying was wrong. And I don't know if that's just because my generation is getting like more experience in this area, or if it's because I just don't know what I would do in that situation, and it's easy for me to say what I think I would do. So why do you feel like in your case you didn't stand up for yourself?
I think you're right that for you it's a little different. This was the late 90s, early 2000s, and we had the internet, but it wasn't nearly the extent that we do now. So the UnSlut project didn't exist. Stop Sexual Assault in Schools didn't exist. These resources that do now weren't there. So I felt like I was the only one going through this. And sexual bullying is different than most other types of bullying because I didn't feel like I could go to the adults in my life for support. If I had been bullied for being overweight or for my race or for wearing glasses or whatever the case, I would feel that the teachers, administrators, and my parents would support me and recognize it as bullying and would help me. But being labeled a slut, I was afraid that if I told adults in my life, and the adults in my life who did know about it, in fact, did blame me slightly for it. You know, they would ask me, well, maybe, or what are you wearing that brought it upon yourself? Or what's your behavior that's causing people to treat you this way, rather than supporting me? And so that fear, I think, was really what held me back from standing up for myself, from drawing attention anymore to the situation. I really just wanted it to go away. So I felt like if I didn't talk about it with my parents and adults in my life, that it wouldn't be an issue anymore. And I was wrong. You know, I wish that I had known at the time that adults would support me. But unfortunately, a lot of girls who are going through it today, who don't know about the resources out there, feel the same way. I think they don't feel really like they have the power to take control of their own reputation and to, like you said, stand up for themselves.
So today we're very lucky that we have such great resources like Stop Sexual Assault in Schools. They have helpful information in videos, survivor stories, Title IX facts, and ways that you can join the movement, how to file a complaint, and examples of how to. I know that the UnSlut Project also has similar resources on their website, unslutproject.com. How do you feel it affected you that you didn't have these resources, and how do you think you would have benefited from them?
It would have helped me so much to know that there were women who had gone through something similar, sexual bullying, or in many of the cases that are submitted to the UnSlut Project, it's slut shaming in response to already having been the victim of a sexual assault or rape, sometimes on campus. If I had known that there were women who had gone through something similar and had not only like survived it and moved past that, but had lived fulfilled lives and become successful and really happy in their romantic relationships, it would have given me strength. I don't think I would have felt so desperate and isolated. And I think I would have found confidence in myself and in my ability to define who I was a lot sooner than I did. So those resources are so important. I'm really proud to be partnering with Stop Sexual Assault in Schools because the focus there is on the schools, the teachers, the administrators, kind of a top-down approach of implementing Title IX, educating people about what their resources are and how they can approach a situation that seems so scary. And the UnSlut project is a little bit from the bottom up, in contrast, and they work together and complement each other in such a great way. And when I say by the bottom up, I mean women and girls sharing their stories and speaking their truths and the way it affects them personally, kind of how we internalize that shame. So speaking about that, starting conversations in addition to working on policy and with school administrators and teachers, I feel really confident that in the next few years and hopefully before a decade passes, we'll have made real progress toward getting rid of this problem altogether.
Yeah, sexual harassment and bullying and slut shaming is a real problem that affects girls all across all schools in the United States. And you have the advantage of hindsight. So, what advice would you give to a girl who's being sexually bullied or slut shamed in her school?
Well, my first piece of advice would be to find an adult in her life who she can trust and confide in them. If there is not an adult in her life who she can trust, which is unfortunately sometimes the case when it comes to sexual harassment, to educate herself about her rights. Stop Sexual Assault in Schools website is a great place to start because it has all this information about how Title IX needs to be implemented, how it's not in schools K through 12. And also, she can start by focusing on what she's good at, what she likes doing, how she would like to define herself, rather than letting other people define her as a slut or whatever they're calling her. So in my case, I had to focus on academics and musical theater. I started taking voice lessons and really embracing my talents and the skills that I enjoy doing. And from there, I was setting goals, I was working toward those goals, I was accomplishing things and gaining confidence in myself that helped me to realize I'm not just a slut. I'm not what these people are telling me I am, and their opinions don't need to define me. So any steps that she can take personally to recognize that, and then working with the adults in her life to the extent that they're willing, and taking advantage of the policies that already exist to protect her, will hopefully, for most girls, help them overcome that type of thing.
And I know parents play a very crucial role in this, but sometimes they don't even know what's going on so that they can get involved. What advice would you give to parents whose daughter or child is being sexually assaulted or harassed?
Right. Well, from the beginning, from a really young age, before a sexual assault happens or sexual harassment happens at school, it's important to lay groundwork where your child can trust you and knows that you'll be on their side if they're to come to you with something like this. And you can start conversations about sex, normalize it from an early age so there's no shame attached to it. And so if a girl is sexually assaulted, she recognizes right off the bat that it's not her fault. That will give her an advantage, and it will also give the whole family an advantage so that they'll be able to approach a situation that's really terrifying with some kind of guidance, with some kind of confidence that they can overcome it. But when it happens, and if there hasn't been that groundwork laid, I think it's so crucial that parents let their daughter know that they have her back, that they provide her with resources, even if it's a little bit surreptitiously. If it's really hard to start a conversation, if you haven't had that open dialogue before and it feels awkward to sit down and say, let's talk about the sexual harassment you're going through at school, you can share a link to the UnSlut Project website. You can share some of the resources on the Stop Sexual Assault in Schools website, or any pamphlets that you have that you think might be helpful, that were helpful to you in the past. Those types of things are really great to start a conversation if it feels uncomfortable to do so yourself. But I would really call upon parents and adults in general, when you're interacting with your own children or children in your life, your teacher, administrator, to take it upon yourself as an adult who has responsibility and perspective, to use that to help that girl get through it and not expect her to be able to figure it out on her own and to overcome the awkwardness yourself. Because I think we can take that on as adults in a way that preteens and teenagers who are going through this for the first time might not be able to handle on their own.
And so, when you were younger, did your teachers and administrators know that this was happening to you, or did they just turn a blind eye or actually not know what was happening?
Some of them knew what was going on and turned a blind eye. Some of them participated in it, and that was the worst memory that I kind of uncovered when I was going through my diaries from that time. I remembered then things that I had kind of blocked out over the next 15 years or so since this happened, that some teachers were actually encouraging it and kind of mocking me along with my classmates, which really hurt to remember because these are adults, again, who are in charge of my education. And instead of helping me work through it, or instead of creating an environment that's not so toxic and that doesn't condone sexual harassment, they were making it worse. And that was really disappointing, especially because I went to what is often considered one of the best public schools in the state where I grew up. And so it was really disappointing to see that even in a school with so many resources, in a wealthy town that really should have been able to provide training, I was let down in that way. And that's the experience so many girls have.
And so, what advice would you give to a teacher or administrator if this is going on in their classroom?
I would advise them to use the resources that are now available to them and really easy to access online. Again, directing them to the Stop Sexual Harassment in Schools website, where they can learn about the law, frankly, what they're obligated to do to protect their students. And beyond that, I mean, if they have any kind of moral obligation to their students, which I feel a lot of teachers do, they'll be able to provide a support system in a way that makes their students feel comfortable. So it's beyond just enforcing the law and the policies that need to be applied in their school. It's an empathy for the students that are figuring all this out for the first time. And in the cases of sexual assault, I mean, in middle school and high school and even younger sometimes, that might be the first experience that that child has had being touched in a sexual way at all. And that's traumatizing if they haven't consented to that. So really acknowledging how terrifying and lonely it can be for students going through that and not dismissing it as something that's not your business, because it is your business as a teacher if you're in that environment with students.
And what advice would you give to a bystander, someone who's witnessing slut shaming happening? Because I feel like maybe not all people know what to do if they're in that situation.
Right, and that's one of the most awkward things. Even if we know that we want to work against slut shaming, in the moment it can be so hard to come up with the right words. So to everyone who is watching this video, I would advise you to come up with something that feels natural in your mouth, something that feels like you might say it anyway on your own, and so that it can be your knee-jerk reaction when you're in the moment. And practice saying it. Something like, knock it off, if that's what you say normally in situations that make you uncomfortable. Or something like, I have your back. I don't think you're a slut like they say you are. I know that you are blank, blank, and blank, a good soccer player, a good painter, a good singer, whatever it is, something to help boost that girl's confidence. And so that's on a person-to-person level. And beyond that, in terms of reporting it to the school administration, it's really something that needs to be up to the person who's suffering more than a bystander, because sometimes it can make it worse. If you witness someone being slut-shamed in school and you take it upon yourself as a peer to bring it up to a teacher or principal, depending on how that teacher or principal handles it, it could make it worse. So it's really something that needs to be talked about with, again, adults that you feel like will be on your side and be able to protect you and that person. And that can be something that the person who's the target is comfortable with.
Well, thank you so much, Ellie, for talking with me. I really enjoyed, and I learned so much, and I'm sure that everyone else who was watching this got as much out of it as I did.
I hope so. Yeah, it's been great talking to you, too. Thank you.